What is crypto-religious work? It's work that uses, quite clearly religious imagery, metaphors, language, imagery, and so forth, but from a position other than that of conventional belief. And in the act of asking yourself what they believe, whether they believe it, you wind up reflecting on your own beliefs and whether you believe it. And that dynamism that's involved in the crypto-religious encounter is what I try both to dramatize in the book and to engender in the reader's encounter with it.
Often when people ask me book recommendations, they say, give me the best in this category or the other. And when people ask for my favorite biography, for years now, I have said that my favorite biography of all time, I think, in terms of enjoyment while reading it and then rereading it and rereading it again and referring to it many times, is The Life You Save May Be Your Own, An American Pilgrimage by Paul Elie. And I think for a number of reasons. One is because this isn't a biography of one person, but of four, and their lives intersect. They're four people who have had profound influence on my own life and thought. Leonard O'Connor, Walker Percy, Thomas Merton, and Dorothy Day, but also the way that they converge and combine. So when I heard that Paul Elie has a new book out, I immediately clicked pre-order to get it. And that new book is called The Last Supper: Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. So we're going to talk today about a range of people, from Bob Dylan to Leonard Cohen to controversies over shock art and all kinds of other things that happened in the 1980s, to ask, what does that tell us about now? You're going to find this a fascinating conversation. Paul is a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. He writes often for The New Yorker. And Paul, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. And thanks for those kind words about The Life You Saved May Be Your Own. I really got lucky with that book.
Before we start talking about the books, you recently wrote an obituary for Pope Francis for The New Yorker. And I just want to get your thoughts about what's happening right now in the Vatican, what the legacy of Francis will be, and what do you see coming with Pope Leo?
My strongest sense about Francis is that his openness was what characterized his pontificate and what's going to outlast him. Now, I've liked all of the popes in different ways. John Paul is a magnetic figure, but for all their virtues, I think they were driven to really shut down certain dynamic areas in the life of Christianity, so that they were just declared off limits or weren't going to be open to further discussion. And Francis was just much more open to the future, to the idea that the church doesn't know everything, to the idea that you can make a mistake and try again, to the idea that people can bring the full range of experiences into the church and not have it from a kind of command and control model coming out of Rome. And that's what I tried to bring out in the postscript for Pope Francis, that his own personal openness led to an organizational openness that was a real significant change in the life of the church, and that I hope Pope Leo will carry forward.
And also caused quite a bit of controversy and blowback. What do you think the people who say, since Vatican II, we don't have the sort of onward advance of the church that we were promised, and instead there's quite a bit of decline, internal fighting. Do you think that's a permanent state right now, or was that just a sort of bubble in time?
In this question and in all my work, I try to challenge a narrative of simple decline. I had a college professor at Fordham, a Jesuit priest, who said, look, the idea that things used to be better than they are now, even if we're not sure why, that's the fall. that's so basic an instinct that our whole religion uh, begins with an articulation of that strong human impression. Back in biblical times, they were already feeling like there was some better time. And that piece of wisdom from that professor is enough to make me want to resist simple decline narratives ever since.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, your book, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, one of the things that was amazing about that book is your storytelling ability, and the other part of it that was really effective to me is the fact that you have these four very different in many ways, but cohesive figures. When you come to this book, The Last Supper, it's almost a mirror image of people as it relates to faith. So it's not the Walker Percy working his way from Shelby Foote and arguments about the faith throughout his life. It's something that you call crypto-religious. And I'm wondering, what do you mean when you say crypto-religious? And what sort of started you thinking about this phenomenon?
Well, you've already identified something of the answer in your use of the term mirror image. So this book grew out of The Life You Save May Be Your Own, and is in some ways a counterpane to that book. In the story of The Life You Save May Be Your Own, they were figures who were, in terms of their belief, close to the center of American Catholicism, but they were on the margins of both the everyday life of the church and of American culture. Leonard O'Connor, who's now in the Library of America, her books didn't sell especially well. Dorothy Day was, as an anarchist and pacifist, on the margins of the Catholic Church whose bishops stood squarely behind the military in World War II and the Korean War and Vietnam. Walker Percy didn't do a book event until 1987 for his last novel, The Thanatos Syndrome. And Thomas Merton was an elected marginal figure living in a Trappist abbey in Kentucky. So central in terms of their beliefs, on the margins of the church and on the margins of American, the broader culture. You use the term mirror image. This book turns things upside down, or is a kind of mirror. It's about figures who are on the margins of institutional religion, but closer to the center of American mass or popular culture. And that very different dynamism informs the book and the whole idea of crypto-religious. But let me pause before I go on. Is that making sense to you as someone who admires The Life You Say May Be Your Own?
Yeah, it does. I found in the book figures. I think you and I would probably see some of them quite differently, but I would see them as ranging from the tragic to the repellent in some cases, but definitely a sort of in some cases a combination of longing, but also alienation in a lot of ways. And I'm wondering, with these people, I mean, one of the things you don't see with any of them, even as they're wrestling with or reacting to religion, is institutional connection at all. In a way, when you think of, I mean, even Dorothy Day at the margins, but she had this commitment to the institutional, organizational church. These figures, almost none of them do. Is that because of something shifting in American life and American religion, in your view?
I'm glad you mentioned the range of figures, because what I found I had to do with this book, which is a little different from the previous book, is that I can't hold them all up as exemplary in the same way. And I didn't try to. Rather, I tried to see each figure for what, in his or her relationship to public religion, to see it accurately. That's my whole goal. So now let's go back to crypto-religious. The term comes from a figure from The Life You Save May Be Your Own, the Lithuanian Polish language poet Czesław Miłosz, who introduced the term in an exchange with Thomas Merton in the 50s. Now, Miłosz had ducked out from communist Poland and was living in Paris. And he described himself to Merton as crypto-religious, as if to contrast himself with the openly religious Trappist monk and best-selling author. Well, skip ahead 20 years, 25 years really. Milosz is really thriving as a poet, now living in Berkeley. So he's a figure in the new book as well. And his term, crypto-religious, became a kind of key to unlock the different dispositions of the people, some of whom you've alluded to, who figure into the book. What is crypto-religious work? It's work that uses, quite clearly religious imagery, metaphors, language, imagery, and so forth, but from a position other than that of conventional belief. So as you encounter the work, Bob Dylan's Gotta Serve Somebody, or William Kennedy's Ironweed, or the gospel songs that are sung at the end of a Neville Brothers show when they're opening for the Grateful Dead, you're asking yourself, well, what do these people believe? Does Dylan really believe it may be the devil or it may be the Lord that you're serving? Are the Neville Brothers singing down by the riverside out of a Christian impulse, or because it's a standard roots music piece? And in the act of asking yourself what they believe, whether they believe it, you wind up reflecting on your own beliefs and whether you believe it. And that dynamism that's involved in the crypto-religious encounter is what I try both to dramatize in the book and to engender in the reader's encounter with it.
Bob Dylan is back in the national consciousness in a way as a result of the release of the movie, The Complete Unknown. One of the things the movie doesn't really deal with at all is that you got to serve somebody a period of time. And particularly this, what was perceived, at least in American evangelical Christianity, as Dylan's conversion. Oh, he's one of us now. And so a kind of almost co-opting of him for evangelical Christianity for a while that didn't last. What happened with Dylan as it relates to religion? Because at the beginning, it seems as though he was a Jesus movement type of convert, and then that dissipated. Was part of it the resistance to being claimed by Christians? Or was this just a kind of experimentation with what it was that he believed?
It's a complicated situation. He was going to a church of the kind that you described in California, led there by some other musicians. And Slow Train Coming, the first record of what's now considered his gospel trilogy, was made with very well-known rhythm and blues session musicians and the guitarist Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. And it was not only a Christian record, but it was his biggest hit record in 10 years. Gotta Serve Somebody was a real hit. It was a great record. It was controversial. It appealed to the FM radio audience, and it appealed to evangelical Christians who could say, he's one of ours. The two records that followed it, Saved and Shot of Love, are even more cryptic than Slow Train Coming. They didn't have hits on them. The musicianship wasn't as distinctive. And Dylan's own Christianity became more and more gnomic and inscrutable than it had been. And I don't think he then changed tack because the public discouraged him or because he wanted to be popular or didn't want to be associated with evangelicals. I think he's a very mercurial figure. His whole life story, and the movie that you mentioned, A Complete Unknown, does capture. He just attaches himself fervently to a tradition or a movement or an impulse and goes straight to the core of it and then moves on. And we could lose the rest of the podcast to discussing that in Dylan's career, but for our purposes, he moved on in a way that had to do more with Dylan being Dylan than with Christianity or the tenor of the times, I would say. But one of the things I try to bring out in the book is that for the next 10 years, a lot of his best songs made beautiful use of religious imagery, just in more oblique ways. And so he didn't cut the cord altogether. He just did it in a lower register.
There are a couple of songs that often get sung in religious contexts that always create a backlash. I mean, I think of one of them being Jimmy Carter having sung at his funeral "Imagine," which of course is not a Christian view of reality or of eternity. But the other is often "Hallelujah" by Leonard Cohen. I've heard this sung at evangelical youth events and other places where I thought, I'm not sure you're getting the meaning of this song. And it seems to me that one of the most interesting characters in this entire book is Leonard Cohen, the writer of that complicated song, not complicated lyrically, but complicated in terms of the split that you talk about in himself. Uh, what what was going on with Cohen with this struggle you describe between spirit and flesh? To put it one way.
So I'm glad that you think that he's one of the most interesting characters in the book, because I felt that in the writing. And when he came into the book, it really changed. Originally, I had focused more on crypto-Catholic writers and artists. But in the case of Leonard Cohen, I really do admire him. And so the ability to kind of get squarely behind Leonard Cohen and his narrative as somebody who really helped sort this stuff out emboldened me to carry the book forward into a new place. So the question then, spirit and flesh. He was known as a ladies' man, even as a boundary crosser by contemporary standards. And part of his attraction, and I try to bring this out in the book, is that he is what I call an old soul. He's someone who seems to have a wisdom that belongs to the ages, even as a young man. And the testimony that we have about this is partly from women who were in love with him, one of them being Joni Mitchell. So his crypto-religiosity was part of his sex appeal, really. But come the 80s, hadn't helped him commercially at all. He was a critic's favorite, even if that. His records sold progressively less, one to the next. He didn't help matters by not touring at all. And he spent some time in a Buddhist monastery, some time on a Greek island, some time in Montreal, some time in Los Angeles. By the time he played at Carnegie Hall in 1985, it was his first concert in New York for 10 years. And at that moment, he decided to really commit to a whole album of songs with what I call crypto-religious dimensions. And it commercially,
Send out the raven in front of the dove and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work at all. He wasn't even put out by his label, Columbia Records. He used a synthesizer, which was, you used the word repellent earlier on. It was repellent to a lot of people from the folk and classic rock crowd. It just didn't connect. So one of the great ironies of history, this record that nobody heard at the time yielded the song Hallelujah, which is now sung in football stadiums and in St. Peter's Square. So it's really surprising. Now, I'm a bit away from the spirit and the flesh, but I think that the fact that out of this crypto-religious moment emerged songs that are now recognized as clearly religious is one of the interesting complicating factors of the story that I tell.
I think about Cohen saying one time, as he was talking about aging, and that a person goes from being attractive to being unattractive to being invisible. And he said, but that's not the worst part. It's the next stage where you become cute. And I wonder how much of what was going on with Cohen, or I think of Paul Simon, who's of late been writing a lot of music that has crypto-religious themes in it. How much of that is related to mortality, in your view, just with the struggle of the reality of death?
I think to some degree it's about the struggle with the reality of death and physical aging in the way that you mentioned. And also it has to do with an artistic life. So in the case of Cohen, his fluency in biblical imagery, Christian and Jewish both, is what's given his work the staying power that it has. And Paul Simon, in a lesser way, I think, is recognizing that. And so as he gets older, it's not me and Julio down by the schoolyard. He's looking for a more perennial imagery that's going to carry his songs out past his own physical death. And so in that sense, the wish to join one's work to religion is about defying death in the way that or reconciling oneself with death in the way that you suggest.
You talk a bit in the book about one incident in which Sinead O'Connor, that you mentioned earlier, ripped up a picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live on television, created quite a controversy in the country. Of course, one of the things she was pointing out is the sexual abuse scandals within the church that later would be in the public eye, and more people would see as a genuine problem. Was her action that way? Did that actually help call attention to these problems, or did it work the other way around? Was this actually a setback to be this provocative and attacking, I guess, for lack of a better word, of the church?
So in a book that's about cryptoreligious work, that act is really as cryptic as they come. And it's precisely because it was so cryptic that it captured people's attention, but also in a way that left it very unclear what she meant. And let me explain in 3 ways. First of all, she didn't say, I hereby tear up a photograph of John Paul II who was giving insufficient attention to sexual abuse in Ireland and around the world. She said, fight the real enemy, or something like that. Second of all, the sexual abuse crisis had been kept under wraps by the church and by the media together. And the news was just coming out in the very moment, the summer of '92, when she wound up tearing up the photo of the Pope in October. And then, and I'm really coming to the point here, she tore up the photograph on live television. Nobody saw it if they didn't watch SNL that night. It wasn't replayed, as far as I understand it. The legacy media, judging it a blasphemous act, didn't show it on rerun. There was no YouTube to go to and TikTok to watch it over and over again. So the act was subject to the interpreters, and the interpreters were newspaper columnists and bully pulpit occupiers who made of this act what they wanted to. And most of the controversy was derived secondhand from people's opinions about the act, which most of us didn't get to see for ourselves and judge for ourselves.
Another of the figures that you talk about is one who is in the news right now, and that's Bono with U2. And of course, as we're seeing PEPFAR being dismantled, Bono went on Joe Rogan show, the most listened to podcast in the country, and did something I can't remember the last time I've seen, which is to make an argument that actually changed someone's mind live on the air. He talked about what PEPFAR is for and is doing, and Rogan said, I think you're right, and became concerned about that as well. What about Bono's ability over the past 25 years or so to bring these odd coalitions together, get things done as it relates to global health while still being artistically engaged? What's different about him than some of these other more tragic figures that we see in the book?
Bono is a devotee in my depiction. He and the other members of U2, they were teenagers when they formed the band, and their early records were so strongly infused with a spirit of devotion. They want to devote themselves to something larger than themselves. But what is it? Psalm 40 is obliquely referenced in one of their songs. They haven't found what they're looking for. Gloria is grand, but also obscure. So their early work which I love, and I saw them live on the war tour in 1983, it had this incredible devotional power that many of us have felt ourselves, but the object of the devotion was really unclear. They went through then a whole phase where they tried to identify it in terms of Christianity, and evangelical Christianity in particular, which meant one thing in Ireland and something different here in the United States. So then they decided to take their Christianity deeper by identifying it with the roots of Christianity in this country as found in music, in gospel music, in blues, in rhythm and blues, in the gospel side of Johnny Cash, and so on. And then, and this is where PEPFAR starts to come in, what Bono's really done, I think in a remarkable way in the past 25 years, is to devote himself to specific causes instead of the general spirit of devotion that characterized their first decade. So relief for people with AIDS in Africa, forgiveness of debt that shackles poor nations in arrangements that enable them never to prosper, a couple of other causes, but those, he's devoted himself to these very specific causes. And why does Bono do it particularly effectively? Because I think he's still that kid who's just like flowing with devotion. He's never become a specialist. He's still a fanboy when he meets these older figures, and he brings a youthful ardor and willingness to be tutored and to be the learner in the situation to the big causes that, for me, and I know that's not for everybody, that really is powerfully offsets the ambition and the striving behind it all, and makes it feel like we could actually do this.
I was trying to think of who right now would fit into this mode of the crypto-religious. And I couldn't really think of musicians or visual artists. The closest I could come is Jordan Peterson, who talks a lot about religion, but then when he is debating atheists and they say, do you believe in God, says, well, what does it mean believe, and what does God mean, and won't actually say what he thinks is there. Who can you think of as examples now of the crypto-religious?
To be honest, obvious examples don't come to mind for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was busy writing the book, so I'm not as informed about the present as I am about 1985. For another, what I try to explain or dramatize at the end of the book is that we're in a different time than the 80s. We're in what I call the post-secular age, which began in that moment. But round about 1989, there was a hardening of the lines between belief and unbelief and disbelief. In the 80s that I depict, you still have Madonna calling herself a Catholic, even though she mounted a protest against the church's policy on condom distribution. You had Bono and Edge and the others on the cover of Time magazine in a long piece discussing their religiosity, and so on. What changed? What hardened the lines? Violence, I think. The fatwa against Salman Rushdie. Suddenly you make a crypto-religious work and a powerful religious leader calls for your death. That has the effect of forcing people to say, well, what side am I on here? As if there's only two sides. So that permeable boundary that existed in the 80s is less permeable. And then finally, just so many other things have changed in American religion. There was a very intelligent review of this book by Phil Chrisman in the Chronicle of Higher Education, and he made a suggestion that was something I thought, but not so specifically, that he thinks that among this generation of adult people who were raised evangelical Christian, that's where to look for the next move here. Because as with Catholics in the 50s, you have a whole generation of people who got a whole lot of religion in childhood and then have spent adulthood sorting out what it means for them personally and means in the public sphere. And he mentioned the singer Julian Baker. I don't know Baker's lyrics well enough to say whether she's crypto-religious, but she's prominent, she's young, she's talented, and she's somebody to watch.
Do you think that the vibe has shifted in terms of a reversing of the categories now, where the left seems to be dealing with the caricature of being moralistic and puritanical. You can't say this, you must say this. And the right actually seems to be enjoying the transgressiveness of saying things that will bring controversy. Has that changed since 1985?
I think you're onto something. I think the vibe has changed. But to me, what's more striking is I think the leaders of the Christian right were hypocritical in the 80s, and they're hypocritical now. In the 80s, you had leaders like Jimmy Swaggart, wagging fingers at the supposed libertines of the left, while meanwhile he was having affairs and doing violence to the idea of traditional Christian marriage. Today, you have right-wing Christians moralizing about homosexuality and a lot of other things, and meanwhile, any thrice-married politician who's willing to sign up for their cause and that they can support, they suddenly are not interested in the traditional Christian values. It's a constant hypocrisy that you can draw a straight line from the 80s to the present.
Paul Elie is the author of The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. Paul Elie, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.